My topic has to do with America's byways and gateways. Two of America's most prized assets, our national parks and roads and communities that serve as gateways to travelers to reach the national parks, and then thousands of miles of America's byways that connect millions of travelers to our nation's scenic, historic, and cultural heritage. These are indeed assets to celebrate, were it not for the threats affecting them. There are just 150 of these designated America Byways corridors consisting of 25,000 miles in 46 states, so they're well represented among states, but this represents a tiny fraction of the 4 million miles of streets and highways in the United States. Byways are indeed national treasures, providing access for travelers to our history, our culture, our natural beauty. But America's byways are in jeopardy. The Byways program, established by Congress in 1991 to recognize, protect these historic, scenic, and culturally important roads and places, and to promote tourism and economic development in these corridors, just 2 decades later, in the year 2012, Congress repealed funding completely. Support for the America's Byways Resource Center, as well as for scenic byways themselves, evaporated overnight. No new national byways are being considered. While some states and localities continue to support scenic byways, the absence of federal support has been a barrier to others. The Scenic Byways Foundation at the national level, who's represented here today by Rob Draper, a dedicated group of volunteers, has struggled to keep a national byways organization alive, but its resources are simply not sufficient to sustain and support the vision of protecting and enhancing America's byways. Scenic byways are good for business. Numerous studies have been conducted in many states, California, Colorado, Maine, Maryland, and others, just to name a few. They've documented the benefits to businesses and local economies from visitors who travel along these byways. A 2013 study of Utah's Scenic Byway 12, for short, otherwise known as the Journey Through Time Scenic Byway, estimates over $12 million in annual economic activity in the communities through which the byway passes. The 2010 survey of the Paul Bunyan Scenic Byway in Minnesota found that visitors spend over $20 million annually while traveling on that byway. So what are the solutions? First of all, US DOT, even in the absence of additional federal funding, which we'll talk about in a moment, should reopen byway designations. There are 60 byways waiting in the wings in 30 states to be added to the national inventory. Secondly, Congress should restore at least some significant funding. Perhaps wishing for 100% of the restoration is too much, but leverage additional state, local, as well as private sources, as we've seen from the parks presentation. Public-private partnerships can be part of the solution. And these funds are needed to support byway organizations at the national and state and local levels as well. So now let's talk about our national parks and the gateways through corridors and communities that lead to these national treasures. They're visited and beloved by Americans, but also by travelers from around the world. Nevertheless, many of them are plagued by roads and some communities that are being exploited by development that is simply out of control and not in keeping with the very park that attracts all of these visitors. The iconic example of this problem was, and I emphasize was, this just plain ugly 307-foot high observation tower opened in 1974 on private property adjacent to the most sacred ground of Gettysburg National Military Park. It sparked a huge controversy, and yet it survived for nearly a quarter of the century, ironically ruining the view of the park in order to give paying customers a view of the park. Fortunately, in an unusual application of eminent domain, it was condemned and demolished in the year 2000. Just as scenic byways are good for business, scenic gateways are good for business. I had the pleasure just this past summer with my wife to visit Acadia National Park for the third or fourth time, and our experience is just always enhanced by visiting the village of Bar Harbor, which is bustling all the time with businesses serving throngs of tourists, and yet the quaint, beautiful environment is just always preserved. And this view of Bar Harbor from the town of Bar Harbor is just amazing, simply stunning. I'd like to quote from a book that was done in 1999. One of the authors was the first president of Scenic America, Ed McMahon, with two of his colleagues, Mr. Howe and Mr. Probst. And you can read this for yourself, but it basically says that preserving what's special about American communities and landscapes does not have to jeopardize local economies. In fact, it's good for local economies. The entire volume was devoted to gateways and gateway communities. There are many tools, and I think as Martha quoted earlier, basically two ways to go about it: through voluntary compliance, which invariably requires collaboration. And one of the best examples of this, as a contrast to the downstream Pigeon Forge, which I'm not going to say anything more about, Gatlinburg, which used to be the poster child for what not to do, through voluntary association of the business community, residents, the political community, is now turning itself around. So there is hope, perhaps even for Pigeon Forge. But there are places where volunteerism is not enough, and so we need compliance with regulation, legislation, and Ron has mentioned scenic overlay zones, design requirements that exist in many communities on a regulatory basis. So what are the solutions? First of all, bringing together the best of the best in an association of gateway communities, possibly under the wings of an existing national organization such as the Association of Counties. That would be an advocate for gateways to our national parks. And by the way, I'm stressing national parks. It applies to state and local parks and wildlands and national monuments and all beautiful open spaces. The National Park Service can strengthen its outreach. In doing interviews for this paper, I found it very situational, where you have a superintendent of a national park who's proactive and forming coalitions. Good things happen, but in other places they're more passive. We can create gateway impact zones that might be eligible for federal technical assistance, especially through the Park Service, and possibly grants if we ever see the return. We'd like to see the 1999 volume that I mentioned, Balancing Nature and Commerce in Gateway Communities, updated to 2015 with great examples from around the country. And finally, the National Parks Conservation Association, we found, has not really done as much as perhaps it could in this area, and we'd like to encourage a national recognition program and local assistance program, and they are so well positioned. They were very helpful in putting this paper together, and I'd like to thank them for that. So that's my presentation, and now I would like to call on Rob Draper, who is keeping the flame alive as the chair of the National Scenic Byways Foundation. Rob?
Thank you. It's certainly a pleasure and an honor to be here, especially when I hear about the 65 conference and all the folks that were there. It's hard for me to fathom that this is even the a relative similar platform that I should be on. So, but regardless of that, as Ron mentioned, I think it's always important to look back. I think it provides perspective and context of where we are, how we got here, and the work that remains. So looking back 50 years ago, there were a few panels on scenic roads at the White House conference, and looking ahead to 91 when ICE-T passed that included Scenic Byways, one might say that Scenic Byways had a 25-year gestation period, if you will, and sometimes change takes that long. But more notably, Scenic America, collectively with AAA, the American Recreation Coalition, and National Trust for Historic Preservation, they really stepped forward, and it was through their efforts that the Scenic Byway program was included in ICE-T, and I applaud Scenic America and the other organizations for that legacy. It's quite a legacy. As Hal mentioned, the respective secretaries of transportation designated 150 roads as National Scenic Byways or All-American roads under the National Scenic Byway program. There was $507 million provided from 1991 to 2012 for over 3,000 projects. And as Hal touched on, people visit a byway to encounter natural wonders, play outdoors, explore ancient sites, trace history, connect with distinct cultures, and enjoy the view. Byways create memories. Yet, FHWA representatives indicate that there's no plans to seek new nominations for National Scenic Byways or All-American Roads, or otherwise revive the National Scenic Byway program. So programmatically, as well as from a practical standpoint, Byways have entered a new era. The foundation recently sponsored a new Byway leader workshop in August, and what we found was that the new generation of Byway volunteers are here. They are volunteers in every sense of the word. They do not have paid Byway-related jobs. They became active in Byways in the past few years, in the post-MAP 21 era, if you will. They had no real knowledge of the National Scenic Byway program funding. And from our standpoint, that was a good thing, because they came with a very fresh view. They realized that as Byways did before the program, and there were a lot of strong Byways before the program, and there'll continue to be strong Byways, they rely on local partnerships to get things done, to fundraise, and to access other funding sources, excuse me. As an aside, the foundation mirrors Byway organizations. We are all volunteer and totally dependent upon our own fundraising capacity. As I stated earlier, Scenic America has long been an important advocate for Scenic Byways and a partner at the national level. We appreciate your support. We look forward to continuing to working with you, and I'd like to appeal particularly to the state and local affiliates who are here. Where you may not already be doing so, please reach out to a nearby Byway partner, engage. And for those folks who happen to be here living here in the Washington area, there's Byways here. Through the generosity of Scenic America and donors, there was an opportunity to allow some complimentary registrations, and at the last minute we have 5 folks here from Maryland Byways. So make sure you look for them and reach out and connect with them, and if you live here locally, you aren't off the hook. Scenic America's and Scenic Byways interests align quite nicely. Wise land use policy, preserving community character and special resources, quality of life for local residents, and authentic experiences for travelers and visitors. Hal, just as an aside, Hal mentioned the Paul Bunyan study where he talked about the economic benefits. They also interviewed local residents in as part of that survey, or as part of that study, to see what they thought about byways and how they affected their community. The top 3 community attributes upon which the residents perceived that the Paul Bunyan Scenic Byway had a positive influence for preservation of natural and cultural historical sites, the quality of recreational opportunities, and community beauty. A byway frames a sense of place, unifies communities, entices travelers, and boosts local business. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you.